Okay, the first lesson comes from Genesis 29, 13 through 28, found on page 25 in your pew Bibles. And it's the story about Jacob marrying Leah and Rachel. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him for a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were lovely, and Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go in to her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went in with her. Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. When morning came, it was Leah, and Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "This is not done in our country, giving the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me for another 7 years. Oh, one more. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife.
You got to make sure you give that wife to her. Okay. Turning then to the Gospel according to Matthew. We read there at the 13th chapter, the parables that we've been reading about the kingdom of God. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he went and sold all that he had to buy that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good fish into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, "Yes." And Jesus said to them, "Therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the masters of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." When Jesus had finished these parables, he left that place. He came to his own hometown and began to teach the people in their synagogue, so that they were astounded, and they said, "Where did this man get this wisdom, these deeds of power? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph, Simon and Judas? Are not all his sisters with us? Where did this man get all this?" They took offense at Jesus. But Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their own country, in their own house." He did not do many deeds of power there, because of their unbelief. So end our lessons for this day. How quick we are to judge. How quick we are to find what is right and what is wrong, and to believe that anything that is not ours is wrong. The last several weeks I've heard a number of grandparents describe having visited their grandchildren, and they're not being raised in the same way in which the grandparents raised their children. And the grandparents scoffing and saying, "I don't know what's going to become of them." instead of stopping to realize how blessed we are to have grandchildren. How wonderful to be able to share one generation to the next. In Jesus' parables, you have land, rich and fertile land that belongs to you. But it seems as if little value unless you can find a treasure in it. To have pearls, but to sell everything for one. Instead of realizing that with all that we have, we could appreciate the difference between. We could choose between this and that and say that they are all good. We live in a time of incredible miracles. We as a congregation have been blessed with those who were supposed to, according to the prescription, die within a few months, who now have lived for years with health and strength and relationships. The story of Jacob's marriages and family are in many ways like all of us. We don't have multiple wives, but we do have family dynamics. Laban's family had their traditions, their customs, their boundaries, and you always followed the tradition. And then this stranger came in who did things differently. And they didn't say that it was wrong, but instead came to appreciate that there were other ways that this could be done as well. Now, this sermon this morning is not in a theme from last week, where last week we had drugs and rock and roll, and this week we have sex. But perhaps at this point, we do need to have the disclaimer that the television and radio has. The content of the sermon this morning may not be appropriate for children. We're going to be discussing love and beauty and sex and fertility drugs in church. Jacob walked across the desert, and when he got to a place that he was in search of water, Jacob did the unthinkable for a man of his culture. He asked for directions, and Jacob found out that he was in the place that he wanted to be. He had arrived at Haran, and he asked the men of that place, "Why are you gathered here?" And they said, "Well, we have a tradition. All the different flocks of sheep come to the watering hole, but we don't roll away the rock until all the shepherds are here, that we can push the rock together to release the water, that all the sheep may have an equal portion of water. So we're waiting for the others to come." And as they waited, Jacob asked the shepherds of that place, "Do you happen to know my uncle Laban?" And they said, "Oh yes, Laban has a great reputation. He is very wealthy. He has great flocks. And by the way, here comes his daughter." And Jacob, always wanting to look out for himself and to acquire as much as he could, tries to get the other guys to go away so that he can have time alone with the rich man's daughter. And he picks up the rock by himself and pushes it out of the way so that the water comes to feed all their flocks and they can go on their way. And then Rachel comes, and he is knocked down dead from how gorgeous she is. She is not only wealthy, she is everything he's ever hoped for. She is absolutely beautiful. And he kisses her hand, and he weeps for how beautiful. And as he's doing so, Laban has heard that a stranger has come, and so he comes to the watering hole to seek this one out, only to discover that it's his own nephew. And so he asks his nephew to come and stay with us, to have dinner with us, and tell us family stories. How many of you are having family come this summer for vacation time? And in that time, will you tell family stories? Some that are embarrassing, some that are sources of great pride. Part of having pearls is because in our family, before the woman married into the family, the father gave to the bride a string of pearls. It happened from my grandfather to my mother, from my father to my wife, and so I've kept up the tradition, and for each of my nieces and all of those that they have married, I have gotten pearls. Not of great value. And As they come to Laban's house, Jacob begins to tell stories, family stories, stories of how he tricked his brother out of his inheritance for a pot of soup, how he tricked his old man out of everything that he had, out of all the blessings that the father could give, by putting hair on his arms. And Laban says, "Surely you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. I'm just as much a trickster as you are. Come, be part of my family. In fact, what should I give you for all the labors that you're going to do as you stay with us?" Now, Jacob had not read Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal. Instead, he jumped immediately for everything he wanted and said, "What I want is Rachel." And he didn't negotiate, saying, "How many cows is this going to be?" or "What's the dowry going to cost?" or "What's the least number of years I have to serve?" Instead, he pledged everything. In Hebrew culture, 7 is a holy number. 7 is perfection. 7 is completeness, like 7 days. And so he pledges 7 years to have Rachel as his wife. And Laban says, "All right." And to him, this statement of love is that the 7 years passed as if only 7 days. We're accustomed in Skaneateles to having great wedding celebrations. We pull out all the stops and have incredible music, incredible fanfare, flowers and dresses, and everything under the sun. Jacob's wedding lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. And yet, after the first night, when he woke up in the morning, he realized he'd married Leah instead of Rachel and consummated the relationship. And so he comes to his father-in-law saying, "What have you done? You gave me the wrong one." Now, at this point, there's an oddity in translation, different from your pew Bibles if you were reading along than the Bible that Heidi read for us from the pulpit. When it's a description about Leah, according to the Bible that Heidi read for us, Leah had beautiful eyes. According to your versions in the pews, it was that she has weak eyes. Now, it may be that Leah was nearsighted. It may be that she squinted all the time. It may be that her eyes just weren't sparkling, that she didn't have the same allure that her younger sister did. In a culture where they're covered from head to foot and all that you can see is the eyes, everything else about Leah was covered up, and so she had pretty eyes. But Rachel was gorgeous. Rachel was fine. And he wanted Rachel. He didn't want Leah. And so Laban says, "Fine. If you will continue the week of celebration for Leah, then we'll give you Rachel also, but you owe me another 7 years." And Jacob does so. When we marry, we don't usually marry 2 different sisters. But part of this story is that you marry the weaknesses and the strengths in the other person, for better and worse. Leah was able to have many children. Rachel was unable to conceive. Rachel was the one that he loved. Leah came along. In marriage, it's not always everything that we hoped for. Oftentimes, we have a lot of other stuff too. And we take the good and the bad and we work beside each other and we grow to appreciate one another. Leah realizes that she has something her sister cannot do. And so she finds a way to garner the respect of her husband by producing children. Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah, she pops them out quick. And Rachel cannot have children. But Rachel heard a story from her husband about his grandmother Sarah. And in their family, Sarah had taken her handmaid and given that to the husband. And because she belonged to the wife, the children that she had belonged to the wife. So she gives her handmaid, Bilhah, to her husband, Jacob. And through this, Rachel has 2 children, Dan and Naphtali. And seeing that Leah cannot have any more children, she sees the trick that her sister played, and so she gives her handmaid, Zilpah, to her husband, Jacob. And Jacob has with her Gad and Issachar. About this time, Reuben, who's the eldest child, is playing outside, about the age of Jacob, who was up here a few moments ago. Has Jacob ever gotten in the mud? I take it from your giggle that yes, just a little bit. Reuben goes out playing and he finds mandrakes. Have you ever bought mandrakes at the store? It's not something that we typically buy. Most of us know about mandrakes from the Harry Potter movie, because mandrakes have always been understood to have a magic principle. As they're pulled up out of the ground, the roots of the mandrakes, which are the part that is eaten, look like a newborn baby. They've always been invested with a fertility property. And so Rachel wants to have these because maybe if she could have those mandrakes, she could conceive and she could give birth to the child that she's always wanted for her husband. So she goes to her sister and asks for Reuben's mandrakes. But the mandrakes come with a warning of possible side effects. May cause death, total paralysis, psychotic hallucinations, blurred vision, dilation of pupils, dry mouth, difficulty urinating, dizziness, headache, vomiting, blushing, rapid heart rate, hyperactivity, convulsions, unconsciousness, rheumatoid pains, melancholy, madness. Really puts you in the mood, doesn't it? Do not take if allergic to mandrake or mangora. Stop taking and consult a physician if death occurs. But she wants them. She wants them so bad that she asks Leah what it will take to have them. And Leah says, I want your night with my husband. And Rachel gives it up. And she has one more night, Leah does, with Jacob. And for this, she conceives 3 more children, including a daughter. And then after a year or more with the mandrakes, Rachel does conceive. And she has Joseph. And later she has another child, Benjamin. And in the process, Rachel dies. Having everything that he had ever hoped to acquire, Jacob goes to his father-in-law and tries to leave with his wives, with his concubines, with all of his children. And the father-in-law says, well, I've been blessed by having you as part of the family. I don't want to give that up. So what would it take for you to stay for 6 more years? And Jacob says, I want my share of the herd. And Laban says, tell you what, of all the herd, there are black sheep, and there are white sheep, and there are speckled sheep, and there are striped sheep. From this point forward, all the sheep that are born that are striped or spotted are yours. All the ones that are black and white, those are mine. And Jacob agrees. And just to make sure that he's going to win, Laban goes into the flock by night and has all the striped and spotted sheep removed and gives them to his other sons who go far away. A few years ago, there were a series of books published about how to get a male baby or how to get a female baby if that was your preference. And they described all the different foods you could eat and having conception under the moon and different positions that you could try and all these different ways to engineer which sex you would have. Jacob apparently had read something similar. He believed that if the sheep were staring at stripes or spots when they conceived, then that's what they would have. And so he took sticks and whittled on them and carved off the bark to have stripes and spots. And just to make it even better, in front of the strong, healthy sheep, he put the stripes and spots. In front of the weak and sickly sheep, he didn't. And sure enough, over the next 6 years, all the healthy, strong sheep, the greatest percentage of the herd, are striped and spotted. And all those black and white are weak and sickly. And Laban realizes he's been had. And he pursues after Jacob, and the two get into a great argument, and they decide we can't live together anymore. And they take a rock and they set up an altar and they make a sacrifice there. And they have a pledge to each other. It's a vow that many of us know that we know out of context, because the vow is the one that the Presbyterian women use every time we meet. The Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one from another. It's not a blessing. It's make sure this one doesn't stab me in the back. Make sure they don't come home. This summer, as we gather with family, it's easy when we're all crowded in together for tempers to rage. It's easy for us to lose sight of what's really important, to lose sight of that pearl of great wisdom that is our relationships and our faith and our love. It's easy for us to have cutoffs, as happened between Laban and Jacob. Don't lose sight of what's truly important. Don't choose between one and the other, but realize that all the blessings of God are available to all of us to share with one another. And so to love.